My name is Barbara Hinchtfu. I live in Prague and I'm a yoga teacher. Currently also Feeding Your Demons technique facilitator. I'm a writer and I'm a mom of 3 kids, so a lot of my current dedication goes there.
Okay, I'm Trevor Tangi and I'm from Sydney. Sydney's my hometown these days. And that's important in the overall context of things because I was born in New Zealand. I started yoga practice in New Zealand, but that was only a quite short period of time.
My name is Amanda Ashe. I live in St. Leonards-on-Sea in the UK, right on the coast. I'm a trauma-trained family coach, and what I do is I support parents and children with emotional regulation skills in order to change behavior, change beliefs, bring the family together, create harmony within the family, help parents get aligned, and create more connection within the family home.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Kreis and I live currently in Berlin, Germany.
And what do you do right now?
I'm currently creating music, singing to the divine, and leading retreats and memberships in which I kind of sing with people, but together with a colleague, and we talk about how to manage spirituality in day-to-day life on a practical basis.
Hi, I'm Sally Appleyard. I own a crystal shop in St. Leonards-on-Sea in East Sussex. And yeah, I work with crystals.
I'm Victor Cheng from Singapore. I'm a yoga teacher. So I practice daily and I share my teaching since maybe 2005. So it has been a long time. I'm really not counting. I'm I'm not counting because I'm enjoying what I'm doing every day.
Hi, I'm Sam Michelle and I live in St. Leonards-on-Sea. I'm originally from Hong Kong and I host classes, workshops, readings based on human design and also offer unlocking new readings and overviews and programs for online clients as well. That combines astrology and human design, and the advanced level goes into gene keys. So yeah, I'm an ultimate problem solver in life, love, health and business. I would say specifically working with these modalities more strategically, let's say 5 years, but I've been in and out, more in, down the rabbit hole, let's say, for the last 20 years in self-discovery.
So, okay, I am Helen. I actually sort of commute between Portugal, California, and London. I own a law firm, so I'm a lawyer, and I work with people who have severe disabilities. So the law that I practice is helping people get their disability benefits from the US government. I have a lot of diverse professional and personal interests. I work with leaders in large corporations to help them get in touch with their fundamental wisdom and their fundamental being so that they can make better decisions for themselves and the world. So I do executive coaching, and I have a 30 plus year background in digital technology. My undergrad degree is in electrical engineering, and I kind of rose up through the ranks in the e-commerce and digital space. So that's kind of what I do in the outside world. And what I do sort of anonymously and in the shadows, at least for the moment, I work with people who are interested in the non-dual teachings. I work with people who are interested in awakening. And since earliest cognitive memory, I have been interested in awakening. One doesn't really know what that means, but one knows the desire. And since I was a very young child, 10 or less, I've been doing some sort of spiritual practice and always had a very deep spiritual longing.
So if you could just start by stating your full name and where you live.
I'm Sam Dillon and I'm from Workington, Cumbria in the UK. I am a yoga teacher and a mindset guide. I help primarily women who are experiencing stress through their job, through all of the things that life throws at us, and I do that by giving them tools that they can use easily without adding more to their plate every day.
So I'm Matthew Clark. I live in Hove. I love it here by the seaside, and I've been here for a long time. And I do all sorts of things. I'm mainly an academic. That's my main thing, and it always has been. Just reading lots of stuff, and also publishing, writing, publishing. And I've got a few fields that I'm interested in. One is on Indian asceticism. I did a PhD on a sect of sannyasis. Before that, when I spent a long time in India, and I did a huge amount of pilgrimage all over India, covering many hundreds of sites over a period of about 17 years. We got fascinated with yatra, this pilgrimage, going to these holy places, finding out about all these obscure deities and all the rest of it, all the mythology that goes with it.
So hello, I'm Jo Allen. I live in St Leonard's on Sea, and I call myself a holistic guide because I find healer and teacher a bit restricting. So I teach different styles of yoga, meditation, sound healing. I hold women's circles and essentially spaces like that. And I also run the Humble Hub and the Humble Heart in St Leonard's Studios. And soon to be therapy rooms and cafe. We're kind of growing. But yeah, that's me essentially.
Hello.
Hi, Natasha. My name's Paul Flitcroft. I have an interesting story since we last caught up. I live in 3 places. I divide my time between my family, who are in Bolton. Most of my work is based in London, but around the UK as well, and occasionally abroad. And then Maria and I, my wife, have a project in Umbria in Italy. So I try and spend time there as well. And for work, I'm a management consultant. For the last 20 years, I've worked in the UK nonprofit sector. I'm trying to help charities kind of move to more human-centered and more innovative ways of working. There's some really great things happening where organizations are finally becoming really beautiful places to work, as well as very productive. The current system of management is like a machine, and that's why people are often so stressed and unhappy. And the latest paradigm is an ecosystem. There's absolutely incredible things happening. So I'm trying to facilitate that as much as I can. And that's the essence of my work. So for the last nearly 40 years, externally, I'm working as a management consultant, as a director of fundraising. But alongside that, and integral, and the most important part of that, is my inner life, which is very much a spiritual one. And so in the Eastern tradition, that would be a householder, somebody as distinct from, say, a monk who might renounce certain external aspects of life. A householder is basically invisible. You just go about doing your job or doing any activity, but you're doing it from a spiritual point of view. And over the last 39 years, there has been a number of traditions that have informed my practice, my self-inquiry, and how I try to contribute to the world and to my own evolution, for want of a better word.
Yeah, and that's kind of like where we met. So maybe you'd like to give a little bit of a story of just your spiritual experiences or journey.
So when I was 24, I decided that there must be more to life than just the ordinary externals. And so I went traveling as you do. And I went around Southeast Asia, and I went to Australia, and through an incredible series of coincidences, through an astrologer in Sydney that had been pointed to me in Singapore. She was the first person who ever mentioned Gurdjieff. And then not long after, I saw this very enigmatic ad about Gurdjieff Uspensky. That piqued my interest. I knew nothing. And that's how I got into the Fourth Way. And I focused on that for about 20 years, and maybe a little bit more. Although the ideas are still very relevant and still very useful. But in terms of what really nourishes me now, I then gravitated to yoga, very much in the tradition of the Bhagavad Gita, as it would be set out there. But I did do lots of Ashtanga yoga for a period, and I don't do anymore, but I did. Ayurveda as a complement to that. So if you think of Ayurveda as the science of the body, yoga the science of the mind, and then I really got into Advaita Vedanta, which I think is the foundation of the fourth way. And I kind of verified that through the Study Society in London, much later. And so that kind of Vedic tradition is particularly what supports and informs my spiritual practice.
I started working in television. That was what I was obsessed with when I was a teenager. As soon as I graduated from college, I moved to Los Angeles and I worked in television. And I met a British actor when I was out there, which is how I ended up in the UK. And once I moved to the UK, I realized that the television industry was very different. After a few years, I did a career change and I moved into nutrition, and I studied to become a nutritional therapist. And I started working with families and children. I was also supporting a lot of women with autoimmune conditions, weight issues, thyroid issues. And I very quickly realized that nutrition is so emotional. Food is so emotional. So I needed to bring some mindset work into my clinic. So then I started training in mindfulness. So I'm a mindfulness practitioner. And then, of course, it's the mind and the body. So then I did further training in somatics. And then I did trauma training, and I'm currently training in myofascial energetic release. So for me, it's all about the body and the mind connection and how we use that to create and live the lives that we want and feel we deserve. So it's been, I guess, almost 15 years now that I've been doing this work. The reason why I trained in nutrition was because at the time I was working on set with cast and crew, and everyone was tired and everyone was overworked and everyone was ill and everyone was burning the candle. And I was really into nutrition and lifestyle. So I was on set just, giving all of this information and obsessed and researching. I was vegan at the time. So I'm 8.5 years sober. And I tried the conventional AA route, and there was something missing from that. I didn't feel connected to that. But as soon as I discovered mindfulness, meditation, and yoga, specifically Kundalini yoga, my life changed. It was like I was up leveling, and like I was changing on a cellular level. So it's been a very personal experience for me, especially this latest journey with myofascial energetic release. In the training, we also have to participate and receive. And it's just amplified my healing, my consciousness, my gratitude. And so I feel deeply personally connected to all of my work.
I began to practice and to study quite early in my teens, because at that age, yoga and, let's say broadly, the Western way of thinking helped me to go through a personal crisis. And then I became a scholar. And after my studies, I stepped into the yoga teachings. Also myself, I became a teacher. Yeah.
Like, how did yoga help you through the crisis, etc.?
What helped me most, I would say, at that time was the routine, the practice, the frame of the body work, the breathing, the meditation. But then for me, it was also important to dive into what's beyond the philosophy, the ideas, the principles. Why are we moving in a certain way while doing yoga? What is the symbolism beyond the practice? What's the real matter of practice itself?
And what is success for you?
Well, that's funny, because as we discussed before, for me personally, success is not a category I use very often myself, but it may sound awkward also, or it may sound I'm trying to be somehow spiritually profound. I don't know what the success is. It's not like that.
How I got on the path gets quite deep, I think, because as I think a lot of people, when I'm finding it, usually comes from a crisis or a big life change. And mine was approaching my 40s. I used to work in fashion. I was married at the time and just very, very unhappy. So I had a kind of breakdown of my marriage, my career. I was just really unhappy with living in London, burnt out, and that sort of thing. I used to travel a lot. I used to be very unhealthy. I used to have a really bad back. I had a back operation, but I didn't know how to look after myself. So I remember coming back from one very difficult kind of buying trip, and I saw a new yoga studio had opened at the end of my road, and it felt like a sign that I needed to do something different. And I'd never tried meditation, I'd never tried yoga, hated the gym. So it was really a leap of faith. I just went for it and thought, this is something I need to do. And I very much disliked it for a long time. I found it too hard, but I loved the Shavasana at the end. So what I discovered, so I would force my way through a class just to get to the Shavasana, because it was this little pocket of magic where my brain stopped working or stopped thinking. And I hadn't ever discovered meditation before. So that was my first kind of discovery. And I was absolutely addicted. I absolutely loved it. So I battled through the yoga sessions until I enjoyed those. It took a while. And then the path kind of opened. Throughout the process, my marriage broke down. I'm now divorced. I ended up getting made redundant from my job pre-COVID. So yeah, my whole journey changed really, because I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life, but I knew that part of it was really important. So I kind of started to look for ways and steps that I could get into more of the wellness and health rather than how I had been before, which was really quite destructive, I think.
I was practicing quite intensively back then, and I started maybe around 99, and I have an opportunity to do a teacher training. But I didn't really teach after having done my training, because I was working at that time. So I finished the teacher training very happily, just practicing as a regular practitioner.
And what were you doing as a profession beforehand?
I was actually in telecommunications industry, and it's quite an technology intensive industry of setting up call centers for companies who wants to own their own call centers. So IP telephony at that time was something leading edge, yeah, as compared to traditional telephony. But then I left that industry, and I started off by organizing the first Asia Yoga Conference. So I'm a very unwilling yoga teacher, to be frank. Yeah, because I was thinking that I like to do some organizing of conferences together, practitioners and people who are interested and keen, and make some money at the same time, but I never had the intention of wanting to teach as a career. Yeah, until very much later, that in a way, unplanned, and it came, and that's how I got into teaching.
I mean, the whole last 40 years has been remarkable. But the last part, probably the most remarkable, in 2019, I came across Kundalini Vidya, the science of spiritual transformation. And I was able to work with a Kundalini master in Rishikesh. And I've been in touch with this lady ever since. Just incredible. That certainly was a big shift in the kind of the quality of my inner life. And that is still very much unfolding as we speak. It's this odyssey. Through a retreat in Rishikesh. So she diagnosed my Kundalini process. So I had an active Kundalini process, which makes perfect sense now looking back. But it was what's called a deflected rising. And in the specific terminology of Kundalini Vidya, a Vajra rising, which brings many beautiful things, but it's volatile and unstable and it's a cul-de-sac. It can never be a culminating pathway to Bindu and Parabindu.
What would you say that your idea of success is?
I'm going to look at that, because this has been a really great question, in two ways, which might seem contradictory, but they're not.
Yeah, I started off, I was really sick physically. I mean, like, nobody could tell me what was wrong with me. And so that's how I kind of came to yoga, because one of the doctors says, maybe you just need to find something which makes you relax a little bit more than just the bath. And that's what I did in 93. So that's a good while ago. I was a student for a long time before I decided to pass on the method to others. And when I moved to Ireland, I ended up taking over a yoga studio in 2006, actually. So I've been on the path for quite a bit. It took me a very long time to digest the method and see that there's more behind it, and then doing the training, and then after the training just wanting to do little bits, and then it was like I was being pushed, come on, do this, do this, do this, because nothing else worked out really for me. I also, just as an interest, I learned the Ayurveda to complement the yoga, and I ended up massaging people, which seemed to be a gift at the time, because, like people said, they really felt the hands, and I was like, okay, so let's do this. But then I ran into a dead end street with all these things due to physical experiences. My body broke down more and more, and I kind of decided, how can I stay on the path? And then this coaching thing opened up, Ayurveda coaching. And I went through that a lot, but it felt more like selling it to people than finding my way closer to the core of myself or my soul. And passing that on, which was my highest goal. And that's how I ended up then starting to sing.
How long have you been practicing yoga?
Interesting. This August coming up, it'll be 50 years. Amazing, huh?
Yeah.
But what I was thinking today, Natasha, I think this is important. I tend to forget this now, and I mustn't. When I was living in Melbourne, and I was in a share house, and I was just 20 years old, and I was a pretty scatty 20-year-old. And to keep fit, I was just running. And funnily enough, I was doing a Canadian 5BX program, which I'd picked up in the Navy. And in this share house in Melbourne, which I really liked being in, there were three very interesting people. One was a blonde Norwegian called Siri, who traveled on the rooftops of trains in North Africa and married a Bedouin chieftain. And she'd written a book with a friend called Ebba. I think it's available these days, but it's quite expensive on books called Love, Siri and Ebba. So she was telling about her adventures across North Africa and India and stuff. So she touched on yoga. But then also in the house was Bill. And Bill had been a real adventurer, and he had a copy of Light on Yoga. And I was thinking today, it so weirded me out because I saw a photograph of Iyengar with his leg behind his head. And that so weirded me out. I wouldn't touch Light on Yoga for a couple of years, which was a pity. But what started me on yoga was Matthew. He was a very gentle guy. And he'd been in India also. And he had a little pocket book on yoga, a pocket edition of yoga. So we look on it now as a pretty terrible book, but it was quite beautifully written. And it gave me the idea that to do yoga, you needed to be quite disciplined and settled and steady in the practice. But I figured out from that it would help me. But here's the bizarre thing. Those three, Siri, Bill and Matthew, really encouraged me to go traveling, because Bill had been in India in the 60s and he traveled on, get this, $1 a day. And that covered his food, accommodation, and travel. And so I set out to go to India on a budget of $3 a day, $3 following on his example. He was my mentor. But the point was, I did that long trip to India, and that was just exactly 50 years ago, because, what we've just had is the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, 30th of April. Now, the reason I didn't know, because get this, the connection is, I'd resigned my commission with the New Zealand Navy as a protest against the Vietnam War, you see. And then I was really, after just 1 year at university, I was on the loose, and really, I mean on the loose. And so that house in Melbourne settled me. I had a really good job in the Tok H pub. That's how I saved the money to get to India. But look, Natasha, this is the other thing. I was so mad. That job at the TOC was a jolly good job. I was making good money. I enjoyed it. But if you had said to me, oh, settle down a bit, you've got enough money, because a house in Melbourne then only costs $24,000. This is the beauty of Google these days. I thought to myself, God, I could have just about paid off a house in Melbourne in 4 years. But no, I was as mad as a hatter and I just took off.
I've qualified as a yoga teacher at the end of 2019, which was a very fun time to be qualifying in anything, of course, given what happened in 2020. So I've done a bit of yoga. I do still share the yoga, guided meditation and things like that. But just recently I've pivoted to sort of serve this niche, as you will. As a lot of people say, when you're giving services like this to people, you should sort of think about what you've got in common with people. And I see myself from 6, 8, 10, 12 years ago, and I think, well, what have I done that has helped me to not be as stressed, to be able to deal with the stress better? And I've gone through all this stuff and all this training, and I find it really interesting. Alongside this, I also do have a full-time job. My employer has I'm useless at saying this correct the first time, ADHD group charter that I'm a part of. There's about 10, 12,000 people working for the company that I work for. There's about 50 of us in this group chat at the most, and there's about 12 or 18 that are really, really active and talkative. And I see myself in a lot of the other women, especially in this group, who are, you're trying to do your job and to be healthy and to raise, look after your children, spend time with your partner, with your friends. Everybody just is all feeling a bit burnt out all the time, because especially as a neurodivergent person, there's that much more that you have to do in sort of natural, normal daily life that a neurotypical person doesn't necessarily think about. You've got your masking and all these other things that sort of add additional weight and pressure that, again, you don't have the time to necessarily go and learn about how to resolve later on, because you've masked out for the day and you're done and you just want to go and curl up in a ball and not interact with anybody. So it's just, I've sort of looked at all these people and looked at myself from the past and gone, here is a really effective, useful bunch of tools that I know about, that I've used, I've got experience of using, I've helped other people with, and here this is the group of people that I would like to help.
And my second round at university, my first round at university was in Wales in the late 70s, University of Wales at Aberystwyth. I did philosophy and religion. Then, after a long gap, came back and went to SOAS. That was where I did my MA and then PhD, and then I started teaching a bit. I was teaching Hinduism there for a bit. And so I was in the sannyasis and asceticism for quite a long time. And then I morphed into psychedelic studies because I got curious about the the ritual drink of the Vedas called soma, or somras, as they say in Hindi. And I realized all these theories about what it was don't look right. It doesn't seem to work. And anyway, that's shortening a very long story, but eventually I started writing all my ideas up, and that got published in a couple of books. One was the Tawny one, then a shorter summary of the argument called Botanical Ecstasies. And I came to the conclusion that what they were doing in ancient India and ancient Persia and also in ancient Greece was drinking a concoction made from plants that had the same effect as ayahuasca. Different plants, but the same chemicals. That was the sort of the discovery. And the further I went on in this investigation, the more I became convinced that that's actually what they were doing, and I collected a lot of evidence. Can't prove it, of course, it's just a hypothesis, but it's the only solution which fits all the evidence for what we have about those ancient ritual drinks.
I spent my career in hospitality, hotel management, and international events. Love working with people. I like to think of my upbringing as an invitation to take the best from the West and the best from the East, because I'm English, raised in the East. And so I was lucky enough to be exposed to so much to do with Chinese medicine and alternative healing therapies, Reiki, essential oils, family constellations, somatic healing. And then my grandmother was an astrologer and a Jungian psychology student back in the day when they had groups that would meet to discuss the Jungian archetypes and philosophies and things like that. She was a part of a group like that, so she was fascinated. And when she passed, I acquired her library. So I then managed to, yes, take up the mantle, if you like, and carry that on. I was just as fascinated. So from that side, mother's side, grandmother's side, I got introduced to so many different modalities, and yeah, then expanded them into my own curiosities as I went along, mainly because of solving my own health issues, and then later my interests in understanding how we are specifically designed to do life and business. Because I think when you suffer with chronic health issues, you're often looking for the biggest bang for your buck, right? You're looking for the things that, okay, if I did this, it has the greatest impact or the greatest ripple, the greatest positive effect. You often can't afford to just throw spaghetti against the wall. You have to be a bit more strategic about how you go about things because you have less energy to work with. So I think through that frame, through that context, it led me to understanding how unique we all are, and yeah, leaning into that rather than avoiding that or trying to be like somebody else. And also I found that it led to this paradox of the more we honoured our uniqueness, the more we found unity and common ground, actually. So that's we think that we have to be one and we have to be the same, or we might think that we have to be one and the same to be one, the oneness of it all, humanity. But actually it's our uniqueness and our differentiation that tends to bring us closer together.
But the point was, even though I had an amazing trip through India, here's one of the problems. I've been brought up to be a very nice, polite kid. So in Bali, someone offered me a glass of water, and I was too polite a kid to say no. I drank that water in Bali. Can you believe that?
Oh my God.
So the whole trip through India was a bit marred by this ongoing problem with my digestion after that. And I didn't have the nous then either to take antibiotics or to go to a local Ayurvedic doctor. I was only 21 years old, or 22 when I got to India. So the point about the yoga, I didn't actually do yoga in India. As soon as I got back to Melbourne, though, I picked up a book on yoga. I was such a weird kid, really, really weird, you know. I always wanted things to be very correct. So I just wanted to do correct yoga. Why the hell I didn't just drop into some place in India and do a little class? I don't know, but I was, you know, so okay. The point was, though, the book I picked up, because see, there were no yoga teachers then. And the book I picked up was a very bad book. Now, I don't want to mention the guy's name, but I think this is hilarious. He had been one of Patabi Joyce's first European students. And Patabi Joyce must have totally freaked him out with the intensity of the Ashtanga. So this dude ran off to Rishikesh and picked up on what's called the Rishikesh series. So get this, the book that he published, the reason it really put me on a wrong track. If you imagine doing the finishing Ashtanga where you do shoulder stand, Halasana, Matsyasana fish, then Shirshasana, his book was sort of based on that, although he had a 3-point headstand to start the sequence. I mean, bizarre. There were no standing postures. I don't think there was even a dog pose in it. It was a bizarre book. Anyway, that particular guy after that put out a book called Pranayama Self-Taught, and bizarrely enough, it had some of the techniques Patabi Joyce taught him for pranayama. But I don't want to mention the guy's name because I hate him. If I ever saw him these days, I'd just go and punch him. But look, it's my fault for taking up on the book. But what was I to know? Look, I had to be careful because I got really sick. My headspace was not good. And see, there's no standing postures, no stability. And so after 2 years of that, my weight dropped down so much, I don't want to say I was less than 40 kilos.
When the body started crumbling and, you know, like I felt like I don't have the energy to massage that much and I don't have the energy to teach that much because I usually often taught by demonstrating a lot. You know, I was physically with the classes more than other people tend to be, and that's fine. But for me, it was the only way to show the method and make people see the method or make visible what's underneath it. And so then in 2013, I noticed, you know, this wasn't the way forward. It felt like I was being stalled. And that's when I kind of moved to America, to Sweden, to America, and then finally back to Berlin. Yeah, I did a little bit of like I did a little tour and was trying to find my place. And then it felt like going home was a safer option. And I also heard that sometimes it's the best way to resolve issues, you know, with yourself, just to go back where you don't want to be and look at the things, So that's how I ended up in Berlin, which is not my home place, but the country is my home place. Yeah. Motherland.
What is success for you?
Yeah, I was thinking about the question then because it's very personal, I think.
So I started working with other teachers and doing little events. And then obviously lockdown was happening. So we were doing online events, but making them a bit interesting. So I do kind of, when we were allowed to in person, yoga supper clubs. So someone would do yoga and me and someone else would prepare a meal and we'd have a lovely social event after. And then when we went online, it might have been, I think we did one that was yin and gin. So I had a friend that was a barrister, and he did a gin. So we sent out little bottles of gin and we did a yin session and then a gin tasting. So it was just little fun things, and also just to get us through those terrible years of lockdown that were just awful. So I really wanted to create this retreat space. And I was like, right, I need to get there step by step. How can I do this? And step one felt like training to become a teacher myself rather than relying on other teachers. So I did that in and amongst all the lockdowns, and that was really amazing. And that got me hooked into teaching. I was like, this is amazing. I love it. I went down then many rabbit holes of sound healing. Yeah, more energy work. I'm really interested in the chakras. So I moved away from necessarily the movement part of yoga being important, even though that is important because it's a big part, but into more of the mindfulness, meditation, sound, that sort of side of it as well. And love creating retreats. I love creating day retreats, collaborating with other teachers. I wasn't ever thinking I'm going to have a yoga, like a studio or anything. This building came up with a flat and then this empty studio space. I hadn't thought that I'd be doing that. But equally what I realised around here and what I discovered, so this kind of South Coast, East Sussex area, there wasn't many places to teach at all. So me and other teachers were just getting very creative. So teaching on the beach is my absolute favorite. Anywhere in nature is my favourite. If I can get outside, I will. But to find spaces was really difficult. So that was it. And I was creating it selfishly for me. So I was just thinking, I need somewhere to do my lovely things. And so I made it perfect for me. And then I just thought, right, well, let's put it out. Does anyone want to use it? Because I know that I needed a space, so surely other people do. And yeah, and it's so popular. It's become a brilliant space.
What is success for you?
So that is really interesting because I know you asked me that question.
But then I've always been interested in yoga too. I started as a teenager doing some experiments with yoga. And then I started doing it on a daily basis in 1990. And that went on and on and on. And then 2017, a great scholar called Elizabeth Michaelis, she put together a little team to publish a journal called the Journal of Yoga Studies. And it's the only peer-reviewed journal on yoga out there. We're very proud of it. It's a long job publishing articles for a peer-reviewed journal, backwards and forwards, and all the editing and corrections and changes, and there's peer reviewers and so on.
And is it the editing that you do?
Yeah, there are four of us who run it. That's Jason Birch, he's the sort of Sanskrit expert, and there's Suzanne Newcomb, another expert on yoga, and there's Jackie Hargreaves, that's Jason's partner, she's also an expert. And then I've never actually asked for these jobs, but I have ended up since then, I think I've worked for 37 organizations doing the philosophy on teacher training courses, and I really enjoy it. The students tend to be very enthusiastic, and if you're doing a teacher training course, you are required to do a certain number of hours of what they call philosophy, which is the history and philosophy of yoga. And so, and then I also wrote a little book called The Origins and Practices of Yoga, a weenie introduction, and it's compact. It's the idea is a little book suitable for students on teacher training courses. And it just divided up section by section, all the sort of main, it's all condensed because students sometimes don't like to read too much. And so the idea is all condensed in this little booklet. So they got a sort of handle on the whole area, as it were.
And then they can also just expand on the areas that take
That's
their
right,
fancy.
yeah.
And Matthew, what is success for you?
That's an interesting question.
When I was 13 is when I had my first Kundalini awakening, which I didn't really understand until decades later. I had always been involved in some kind of spiritual practice. I got involved in a fourth way group for many years. Then I found Advaita Vedanta and was blessed to have Swami Dayananda Saraswati be my teacher for a while. My background, probably in the last, since 2008 forward, is in the non-dual teaching space. So that's Kashmir Shaivism and Advaita Vedanta and the direct path and Neo-Advaita. And my perception at this moment in time in the Western non-dual circles is that a lot of people are hanging out in this space of unity consciousness. They're hanging out in this sort of transcendent state of unity consciousness, believing that is the end of the spiritual path. And um, when I was hanging out in in the state of unity consciousness, which is around 2012 or 2013, I was told by my teacher that I was done. Like this was it. You have awakened. And what you need to do now is integrate this experience in your life. And there was something in me that felt like, no, there's something else I'm not getting, I'm not seeing. Like this felt like this was a portal to or an entry in or some other shoe was going to drop. Like I just had this intuition. And in this time frame of 2012 and 2013, I was like walking around in this 2 years in this like state of samadhi where distance had completely collapsed. Everything was immediately present. There was no there. There was no here. It was just this incredible effulgency of experiencing. And it was hard to integrate. I mean, driving 70 miles an hour without finding a there to the here, like I had to teach myself how to walk again. It was like that extreme. And around this time of 2012 and 2013, I started to attract students and I attracted a book editor. And like I was getting these signals like, this is it, you're done. This is, enlightenment. And I do have to say, incredible state of being. Like just this is what I call the second shift, because the first shift was pretty profound as well, which we'll talk about another time. But anyway, but there was something in me that was like, no, like, don't talk right now. Don't teach right now. I was writing prolifically, but as I said, there was something in me that just felt like, no, this is not it. This is not done. And it was actually a difficult conversation with my teacher at the time, because I said to him, I think there's something you're missing. And then I got my answer like a year later, and that was, this is where words really fail. That could be described as a death, immersion into the absolute, prior to consciousness, prior to I am. That took 10 years to integrate. So when that happened, I can't say it was an experience. I can say that it was the end of experience. It was the end of experiencing. It was the end of consciousness. Non-existence. And I will say that all of our ideas of life and death are so completely wrong. So completely wrong. It took a good 2 years for me to be fully functional after that, and a good 10 years for me to integrate that understanding enough to actually start talking to people again now. So all of this was sort of the foundation for what I'm presently doing under the radar as I said, which is working with people who, let's put it this way, people who have an interest in these matters, people who have an interest in awakening. And that is a charged word. It means different things at different points in one's development. And that's the story.
It's fantastic, Helen. That's great.
Now, okay, so it all turned out for the good because I had to drop into a healing center and they wouldn't let me out till I put on weight. But at that point, I realized I needed to start work on light on yoga. And so that's when I started light on yoga, and why I'm always indebted to the old man Iyengar to this day, because those standing sequences put down in that book are so good. And that's when I started to pick up my strength. And so that's really the beginning of my yoga. From 1977, I started working from light on yoga. When I got out of the hospital, the psychologists in the hospital were quite clear that it was some real problem with my family. And so I moved into the yoga center. And this very unusual Dutchman who'd done Buddhist meditation in Thailand had set up what was called the Lotus Yoga Center. And so there were a group of about almost 12 of us, I think, at times living in the yoga center. And we were a really eccentric bunch, but also very lovely, very idealistic about peace and all the rest of it. And because I was studying at university then, which was just up the hill from the yoga center, it's very convenient. I just walk up to the university. And so that teacher, he was more a meditation teacher. He couldn't teach asana to save himself. He was a lovely old guy. And so he asked me to teach yoga classes. And I thought, no, I can't teach these classes. I'm not trained. But I couldn't really say no because he'd given me a place in the yoga center to live. So I started teaching. That's how I started teaching in 1978.
Oh, where was that, Trevor?
In Wellington. Oh, look, I don't want to mention it now, but there were such eccentric people, including myself, living in the yoga center. But that's how we got started. But it was a lovely community. Look, Natasha, dinner times in those nights, we'd cook for 14 people because there are about 8 to 10 of us in the community and they'd bring their friends in. So we often had 14 people for dinner.
Beautiful.
It was very, very lovely, actually.
You've been teaching now for 50 years, basically. What does success mean to you?
Well, there are two things. It's about to start again as a beginner and keep stable. So stability to me is the touchstone of success. That's one. And I think the other success is it's really hard work, because my journey from Wellington, especially to Iyengar's, was like fraught with trauma the whole time. So in other words, the reason for that stability, the journey of yoga at some point is going to involve extreme trauma. And I was lucky to survive those first few years, actually. I wasn't prepared for the intensity of it. So success, just to have survived it.
Yeah.
But no, these days, seriously, it's to be a better guide to the younger students than what I was guided in those first few years. It was manic. It was just mad. Like, for example, I must say this, if I can just stay with those classes in Wellington, because of course I didn't know how to teach that well. And every time a student turned up in the class and I could see they could do the standing postures, I'd say, who taught you this? And they all said the same thing on Martin Jackson. There were about 3 of them, a guy called Phil, there was Claire from Christchurch and one other woman. And they'd all been taught by Martin Jackson. But the point was, no one knew where he was because he'd sort of slipped out of the country and gone off to Sydney. And it was Claire then gave me Mr. Iyengar's address and I wrote to him. And I ended up going directly to Iyengar's in 79, you see. Because there were 2 or 3 teachers up there in Auckland, and to do a class, I'm serious, I'd hitchhike up on a Friday, do classes on the weekend and hitchhike back on Monday. But one of those teachers said to me, when you get to Iyengar, if he sees how hard you've been working, he'll help you. And that was the most stupid thing to have said. It's like, it was the worst.
No, but I get that.
Yeah, but like Iyengar was very unusual in those days. He was pretty relaxed with the Indian students, but any Westerners, I take it now as a compliment because I was doing general classes when I got to Pune and there were just 4 Westerners and I was a scapegoat. So he used to just really tear into me. He didn't care about the posture so much. It was just sheer psychological terrorism. Now, what I'm getting at, if that teacher in Auckland had said, Trevor, you've been to the Naval College. I've been through a real bastardization process at the Naval College in the first year. And so it was a bit like that, really intense. But you see, the group in Wellington, we used to sit around and hold hands and chant Om Shanti and with shut eyes and stuff. And so I went from that to Iyengar. Or Natasha, because I'd played rugby, my big passion before yoga was rugby. I played halfback and the opposition flankers would really come around to try and tear your head off. And so if one of those teachers said, it's going to be like playing halfback with a fierce opposition flanker, I would have been okay, but I wasn't ready for.
You weren't warned.
No, I wasn't. I had no idea. And look, here's the funny thing, Natasha, also why I think that intensity did not work. Well, it did work for me once I'd sorted out the pieces years later with Ashtanga. But you see, the funny thing was Martin Jackson turned up. I actually met him in Pune. He turned up at Christmas, New Year. And he wasn't really able to help me when I told him, like, that the old, because after a month that I did classes in November, I just ran away in December to Goa for a while just to settle down. When I came back, I met Martin. I said how bloody intense and terrifying. The classes were terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And he didn't really seem to know how much he could help me. He did say it was probably something psychological. Well, the advice I give to someone, you just got to be a beginner all over again and just listen in. The internal space which he got to with me was funny because after all of the terrorism, he just got exhausted and didn't know what to do with me. So guess what flipped me? About the third week, he came and stopped in front of me. And get this, Natasha, I'd gone to India on a one-way ticket, sacrificed everything, gave up one of my best girlfriends ever to go because I was on a spiritual trip. And he looks at me and he says, if you don't change, I won't let you come to class anymore. And it was like getting to the drug dealer and saying, or the pub and saying, there's no more beer, or the dealer saying, there's no more drugs for you. And my mind just totally flipped because I thought, I don't know how to change. I've got to change or else I come to class. And I just completely flipped into a really remarkable space, which was quite precious. But it came from that, not the sheer brutality. It was more a psychological flip I had to go through. Well, it was a sort of a fear, but it was more recognition of the limitation of my own mind. Like, I'm serious. Like, I realized I've got to change. I don't know how to change. And the mind that I knew was no longer any good.
So, like, success in your life, how do you view success as Trevor?
Oh, as Trevor. Good God. It's a very good question.
So would you say that you're helping others through your own personal experience?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. As I say, I've got the experience of feeling that particular way, and I've got also the experience of getting myself out of feeling that way. And it has taken a long time. And if anybody had come to me and said, here's a written list of things you can do, here is a little, this, that, and the other, it would have made my life easier. And I would have got to 40 and felt like I do now, but I maybe would have felt like this 10 years ago at 30 or even in my 20s, and that would have been wonderful for me, and life would have been so much more easeful. It's that, you've got a meeting in 5 minutes and you're just feeling really stressed and pressured about it because maybe you feel like you've got a lot of expectations and weight on you, or you've got some anxiety about it because it's maybe a one-to-one with your manager. If you've got rejection sensitive dysphoria, anything that they say that is, it's not necessarily mean or nasty or actually, rejection sort of focused, your brain can interpret it that way. So whereas a manager might say, you've done really well with this, but you could do better with that, or you could improve it by doing this. If you've got rejection sensitive dysphoria, for instance, you take that as like, oh God, I've done terribly wrong. I'm a horrible person and I'm shocking and I don't deserve any of this job. And you can really spiral like that. So just having the tool to sort of take a step back and take a few breaths and just sort of think, actually, no, let's look at this. As much as my brain is telling me this, let's look at it from a rational standpoint. It's actually, this is what's going on. Yeah.
And so would you say that, I hope you don't mind me getting personal.
No, not at all.
Is there something that you could share that you experienced that sort of maybe even made you spiral to then find ways of dealing with it?
I've had my office career, as I call it, has been sort of quite varied and interesting. There have been micromanaging managers, which can be an additional problem if you're neurodivergent. And there's been times when I have been sat at my desk at work and I've sort of had palpitations and sort of for anxiety, and I've been able to sit there and just sort of calm myself down without anybody knowing around me what's going on. But I think the best example for me is I was sat one day having little palpitations, little anxiety attack, and it actually turned into a panic attack. And I got up and I walked out to the kitchen in the office and just sat for sort of 5 minutes, did a little bit of breath work, and then went and sat back down at my desk, and nobody had the foggiest what had gone on other than I'd gone and I'd come back. Which, of course, if I didn't have the tools that I had, it would have been I'm having a panic attack, I probably don't know what's going on. And I would have, got sent home from work, and there would have been a lot of panic and worry about what had gone on with me. I would go home after work in the evening, and I would just collapse. I would not want or be able to do anything. I would feel terrible I do still feel terrible when I've messed up, but I would feel terrible for days and days when I've messed up. I would assume every interaction was negative and that everybody was always sort of like negatively judging me and waiting for me to mess up and to make a big enough mistake to say, you know what, you're done. It's made a really big difference to me.
It was one of those things that kind of just happened naturally. I have always had an interest in crystals, and then had various health things going on, and I was looking for alternative ways to help myself, and I started working with crystals and got some really quite amazing results through that. I do suffer from anxiety, and about 10, 12 years ago, it was particularly bad. And I was getting really bad headaches, and I was just not feeling myself at all. And I picked up a piece of amethyst from a local shop and started reading a bit more about properties and how you can connect to them a bit more. I'd been drawn to the amethyst. It's a stone that I've always gone back to. I remember having a ring when I was a kid, and so yeah, it was a natural kind of one for me to pick up, I think. And I started using it to help with anxiety, and I also used it to help with headaches. And I used the same piece for probably a couple of months, and I started to see some real differences in how I was feeling. So I just very uncharacteristically decided that I wanted to get more involved and I wanted to share my experiences. And to do that, I decided that I would start selling crystals, which I did in markets first. Yeah. I did lots of Christmas markets, just local markets. I did a couple of pop-ups, and then I did a bit of manifesting, and now I've got my shop. I used to work in TV. I worked many years ago on the South Bank show and kind of art-based programming, at ITV. I think the ultimate, the way that I would describe it would be doing something that you love. I think if you can spend your days doing something that you love and that doesn't really even feel like a job, then that to me, I feel like I am successful in that respect. That would, yeah.
And what would you say that Victor's idea of success is?
My idea of success very simple. Yeah, you need to be able to feel contented every day and be grateful. In a way, be grateful the fact that you have a tremendously healthy body to continue with the practice, and not having to worry too much about financial requirement. That's a blessing, But most importantly, having the health, having the ability to continue your practice every day. That is my idea of a success, because every time when I finish a practice, I have this feeling that I'm successful. Yeah, so that's how I felt like, I have achieved something for the day. I encountered Buddhism when I was about 19, and I take the plunge. I took the refuge at that time, and I went into studying of Buddhist philosophy at that point in time. Yeah, so then I got a lot interested into Buddhist philosophy. That's why I think that helps me to really understand about yogic uh, philosophies and ideas. I got very much interested uh, when I study the Yoga Sutra, and also like Hatha Yoga Pratipika, and I wanted to know more about the origin and the relationship between these philosophy with Buddhism, So this is my area of interest. The practice is always helping us because you see, when you are in a state of a good health, it's so difficult for you to have uh, sort of kind of emotional instability. Yeah, because our state of mind, our emotion, our feelings, how we feel, has a lot to do with our ability to keep our health in check. So if the organs are balanced, if the practice is giving us what we need for the day, it should keep us having a good feeling of ourselves and a state of being in control. Yeah. So I do have a moment, when COVID started, that I'm a little bit disarray. Yeah. And I couldn't really focus on my practice at that time. So being away from practice for some time, yeah, um, has caused me to go into some kind of a depression. So I realized that because then I connected the fact that, the practice and the state of health. Because if I don't have my practice, um, it's more difficult for me to keep myself in control. Yeah, and especially the way I feel. Our feeling has to do a lot with our emotion. So when we take our practice seriously, I'm not talking about taking a long time, but it can be even as short as like 30 minutes. But really doing it and very much with that state of mindfulness, breathing, and synchronizing the breath with the movement, just 20 to 30 minutes can create a lot of change. So I understood that if I don't do it, somehow it's difficult to keep myself in control. Yeah. So if you are doing it consistently, then you have a good state of well-being.
So, in my 20s, success was climbing the ladder, climbing the corporate ladder. And I think then in my 30s, success was being rewarded with money and, being able to buy lovely clothes and handbags and that sort of thing. And that felt like success. And then I think that felt very hollow. So that success didn't last for me very long. And that's where I came to that feeling of there's something, my midlife crisis of there's something wrong here. This isn't making me happy, even though I've told myself that I'm successful. So then success, I think, became for me finding peace. When I found that those little pockets of time of meditation and I could try and create my life to reflect that felt like success. I was no longer, answering to a boss that would bully me. I was no longer in a marriage that was really unhealthy for me. For me, success was that I was feeling independent and I was in charge of my own well-being. Because before I don't think I was in control of it at all. So that felt like success for a while, but also I didn't really know what my purpose was either. So it felt good, but it wasn't quite right. And then I had obviously a bit of the dip when my parents passed away. So at that point, success was really getting out of bed, because my whole world had just been shattered. So success was really little wins every day, kind of, even just washing my hair would have been a real success moment because I'd been like, yeah, so it was, interesting. So then my whole perspective on everything changed again, as to what success is. And I just thought life is so short. Striving for something that you see as success in the future is absolutely pointless because it may never get there. So success has to be every day, I think. And in terms of what I do now, I was thinking, is this successful? It's a busy studio. So yes, it's successful in other people's eyes, but unless, it depends how it's being used. So success for me is seeing other teachers now flourishing and, growing their business and loving using the space and students being excited and everyone just creating this kind of happy environment that people are using is success.
If you could put that in one word, what word would you use?
Oh, one word.
Well, these days it's to be in the moment much more than projecting out of the moment. And it's to be adaptable. And something I guess that he was trying to teach me all those years ago, that we don't have the answers, and that's okay.
Well, thing is, I reckon that you never actually arrive anywhere, really. It's just a continuous journey in whatever endeavor you're involved in. And I think of success primarily in terms of individual successes. So, if I've gone and visited a fantastic place and it's all been great, that's a success. And then if I've just published an article or a book, that's a success. I also do music. It's called Mahabongo, Mahabongo. That's my music stuff. And then when I finally finish an album, I feel immense satisfaction. I've successful. I finished it, even though only about 4 or 5 people log onto it on YouTube. But never mind. It's not a financial thing. It's just the success is the doing. It's in the doing. I derive great pleasure from doing things, and the success is completing projects. Because wherever you get to, I mean, even if you have 1 house, 5 houses, 10 houses, I mean, there's what defines success? It's never ending. Because when you get to wherever it is, then of course you can just continue. There's more. You don't actually just stop. So success for me, it's sort of a step-by-step process of success. Working on any project, actually, if you really love the people you're working with, then the whole thing just cooks. It's not a question of how competent they are exactly or how expert. It's not that. It's actually there's a sort of vibe between you, and that is it's not only very pleasurable, but also that communicates itself somehow. And so I think it's very important to work with people you really, really get on with. And I think a lot of the problems people have at work, it's not to do with the work itself. It's actually the people they're working with. You just can't quite connect properly, and you're living in different worlds. So you do that. You might be very competent at what you do, but the whole thing is not that pleasant because you're just not working with people you really enjoy to work with. You hang out with them anyway, regardless of the job. That's what I reckon. Yeah.
And Matthew, would you say that your idea of success has changed over the years?
Not really. I mean, I've just always wanted to do things, and I've been extraordinarily lucky be able to do all sorts of things that I wanted to do, especially traveling. Going to see places and exploring places has always been a great thing with me. Exploring the world, exploring the mind, exploring everything.
Okay, one final question. If you had to put success in one word, what would that word be?
Well,
my idea of success has always been peace and progress. I feel like maybe I don't know if you can have peace. I think you can have peace and progress. For me, progress brings me peace. So anything that gets in the way of kind of moving forward feels like a disruption of my peace, for sure. And feel like success to me is more an experience of life on a daily basis versus a thing that I get to, a result that I get. But things that are creative and innovative and progressing and interesting and feel fun and adventurous feel good to me.
And has your idea of success changed over the years?
I think the qualities that I've just shared haven't. However, the thing that I feel has changed drastically is many years ago, again, I think in the context of chronic health issues, my thought process along finding success, again, maybe I thought it was more of a destination. It felt like setting up a lifestyle where I didn't have to show up, right? So I could set it up. It was passive, income generating, whereas actually I realize now, again, having solved my health issues and feel really good, actually success is far more about participating, contributing in a more active human to human way. And so that's probably the greatest difference, is that before I wanted to see how I could not show up as little as possible. And now I want to see how I can show up as much as possible. So before, success felt like freedom from everything. And now success feels more like responsibility, taking responsibility of things.
If you had to choose one word to state what success is, what would that word be?
I think for me, success is making good choices. So choices that my external life, in inverted commas, and my internal life, both of those things rely on really good prana, really good energy, and also a focused mind. When I make really good choices, then that helps my energy and it helps me to be focused and putting my attention where it needs to be. And I feel that I'm more effective in making a contribution to the world. I really try and have that as my primary benchmark. How am I helping to make the world a better place? And so that starts with my practice in the morning. And so that would be an example of a good choice. If I do my full practice, which is like 2.25 hours every morning, then that's a fantastic way to charge my system, my physical body, my mental body, my subtle body, with all of the energy it needs, so that when I go and talk to people or meet people, they get the best of what I am. But I wouldn't call that a success, because in a way, if I'm calling it a success, I'm kind of like labeling my experience so that something's a success and something's not a success. So for me, success would be like the pair of opposites that Krishna would talk about in the Bhagavad Gita, like, pain and pleasure, hot and cold. You just got and yoga is that to be equanimous, regardless of the highs and the lows. But I think the other side of it would be like the unfolding of spiritual life ideally would be accompanied by progressively deeper experiences of oneness, being one with the one, for me, in meditation. And you sort of, from one point of view, you could say, well, is that a success? Is that a barometer of success? But in a way, it's like, who's claiming this success? It's only some part of the mind, and to me, it just resonates of ego. It just sounds completely like ego-driven. And also, if we understand what oneness means, the mind is temporarily suspended. It's not even there. So it can interpret that something amazing has happened after the fact. But to then say, well, it was a success, it's kind of verging on the slightly ridiculous, or comic, actually. It wouldn't be like comic spirituality. So for me, instead of success, I think gratitude, appreciation, and just trying to treat all experience evenly. That's kind of where I am, and that's, I'd say, positive. But then somebody could say, well, if you're calling that positive, then something is negative. You could go on forever, but I think you get the general gist.
And Paul, has your idea of success changed over the years?
Yes, definitely. So if I look back at a young Paul kind of roaming around a vineyard in Northern California as part of my fourth way experiences, I'm kind of doing, and, I do this and I'm going to get that. So it's much clearer, it's much simpler. And there's I don't have that kind of striving or that kind of like feeling like you've got to make these huge efforts to do anything. So I think letting go of notions of success could be a very good barometer of success. I also was thinking about the various mystics from different traditions who've tried to describe, oneness experiences, but I don't remember them kind of trying to claim some kind of success from those, no matter how remarkable they were. It's not. I think they just felt they were blessed. It was grace. It was just the most incredible good fortune.
So then, I need to ask you now, if you had to put success in one word after everything you've just told me, what would that word be?
Success for me is being able to help people. It would be lovely and wonderful, of course, for people to be throwing money at me and to be able to buy a big house, go on holidays every month, and all these fancy things. But success for me is when my husband got costochondritis and he was in agony with every breath that he took. We did a yoga nidra practice and he fell asleep. Deeply asleep, and just was so rested because he was, whatever the magic had worked, and he just was able to rest. It is having clients who come to me and they are feeling stressed, and we try a few different things, and then they feel so much better in themselves, and they know that they've got tools that they can use without needing me. Again, coming back to Yoga Nidra, it's one of my favourite things. People coming to a yoga class for maybe the first time, maybe not the first time, and just really enjoying my style of teaching and the way that I teach and I have been taught to teach. My first train of thought was, if I do my yoga teacher training, I will learn more and I will know more, and I will be able to turn this into a full-blown career and the office job can just go. And while that is still a goal of mine, it's not the most important one, as I've realised that it's not just my life that can be touched by yoga in the way that it has been and is being, that it's other people experience the same or more, in some cases as well, and it is just wonderful helping people.
And if you had to put success in one word, what word would you choose?
That is a good question. Success in one word. Obviously not success. Yes, that's cheating.
So it depends on which area of life we look at. I often talk about 5 pillars of life, which is spirituality, relationship, career, money, and health. And then on that pillar of life, the spirituality, I think I'm pretty much successful at this point. Like I can really feel my connection to the divine has deepened beyond my personality, beyond my emotions, so to speak, and that's a success for me. As for other pillars in life, some of them are successful and some are not. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And has the idea of success changed for you over the years?
It certainly has. I think success, like for everybody, visible to other people. Successful means often for people around me or the way I met people. Are you successful in your career? Are you making your path, carving your way? Are you successful financially? Are you earning more and more and more? You can show that you earn something. You can afford the better life. And that was how I saw success. And it took me a long time. And that was part of the growing process. Even with the Ayurveda coaching, I was totally successful with that for a glitch in time. But then it didn't really bring something to me that needed to be seen. So I felt like I'm successful, but I don't feel successful. So how come? And that it was because the financial success was just masking still the things I didn't look at. And as I said earlier, without noticing it, that my deepest calling was to really grow in spirituality from the beginning, so to speak, on my path.
So for this particular conversation, I'm going to ask you, what is success for you, for Helen?
Yeah, I think part of it is age because I'm in the last quarter of my life in theory. If you figure that a human has about 80 years of on the clock, I'm in the last quarter of my life now. I look better than that.
You do.
So part of it is where I am in my life, and part of it is the understanding that was gained through that spiritual journey. I can't relate too much to this idea of success because it kind of is like appropriating an outcome to yourself, which feels odd to me at this point in my life. And there's this, I think I mentioned this to you before, there's this wonderful line from a Coleman Barks translation of Hafiz, which is, I am the hole in the flute through which Christ's breath moves. Hear my music. Yeah. So I can't entirely relate to this idea of success as an outcome or appropriate whatever outcome arises to myself or an effort that I make. I don't know how you feel about that as an answer, but
I love
that's
it.
okay. So,
Oh, I love it. And so, has your idea of success changed over the years?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think the most clear example is in order to claim success or appropriate an outcome, you have to have a very strong belief as yourself as the doer. And that everything that happens in your life is as a result of your personal will and your personal control. And as I said, I think just living one's life a certain number of years, in addition to the spiritual understanding that things may not be as personal as you think, that changes this idea of what success looks like. So yeah, many years ago, I definitely had this idea of being a doer. I could get things done, and it was a matter of personal will, and it was going to happen. Yeah. So there was no question, no question.
Mm.
And what's interesting is when that is released, it's amazing to see what actually manifests that you can't call your own. But it's quite amazing to see what arises when that sense of doership is released. Then, yeah, then success.
Mm. Yeah. So then that brings me to my last question.
Yeah.
Is if you had to put success in one word, what would that word be?
Ooh, that's a hard one. You didn't tell me that was coming.
I left that one out.
Ah!
Just Victor, what has your view of success changed over the years?
Yes, definitely. Prior, we are always more concerned with our daily life. Yeah, we are always more concerned with our financial existence. So we compare ourselves with others, and we try to have a role model of someone financially better than ourselves, and then we try to bridge the gap. Yeah. But now I feel that success is more of a notion of how uh, you are able to accomplish what you set out to do every day. So it's more important that we have a plan for the day, and especially for our practice, and we accomplish our plans daily. And if we are able to accumulate our success in this way, then over time, you see something coming towards you. So I'm not so, in a way, looking for something immediate.
For me, I think success is something that you can be obsessed with, because if you're going to be successful, I feel like there needs to be an internal motivation, and that internal motivation comes from obsession. It comes from hyper focus. It comes from being fully embodied in what you're doing, and then it's just a part of who you are. I think that you can be successful doing something you don't love and you're not obsessed with. But I think that energy exchange between those two things is much more laborious. So success is obsession in simple terms. Especially when I was first starting to work in television, I thought success meant, celebrity, famous status. I worked on the other side of television. I worked in production. But my goal was to be, a well-known, famous producer and director. And that, for me, equaled success. And it wasn't until I was journeying down this path and realizing how personally fulfilling and rewarding the work was, and how I was investing all of me in it, that my idea of success changed.
If you had to say success in one word, what would it be?
I think probably when I was younger, I kind of was all about striving towards, the next level of what I thought was going to be my kind of career for life. But yeah, things change, don't they? And circumstances change. And yeah, so I think now it's more important that I'm happy and that I'm doing something that I love than kind of, being on that treadmill of that kind of, crazy life that you can get wrapped up in.
And if you had to put success in one word, what would that word be?
In one word.
What I use rather for myself, it's a bond or relationship in between the principle and function, or maybe let's say intention and the results. Because my personal experience or the experience of my life is that often there is an intention, and then things happens in their own way and the result may be different than the initial intention, but yet a lot of wisdom, I would say, arises from the gap. So I can make an example of my life. I'm divorced, and yet I do not consider my first marriage as unsuccessful because I learned a lot. So I'm grateful for it. I quitted my academic studies after my master's, so I didn't get a PhD, although my initial idea was heading there. But I don't think my university studies were unsuccessful. I studied with my Brahmanic teacher for many, many years, and then I had to quit there because I had, for some internal reason, to take my trust back. And I don't regret it. I met my other teacher, Tibetan Buddhist teacher, who was excellent, and he died a year later. I met him. So also here, I wouldn't say, oh, that was an unsuccessful happening. So for me, maybe a success is being in peace with the things as they are, as they appear to be, learning how to be in peace with what is.
And would you say that your idea of success has changed over the years?
Sure. Maybe not the idea of success, but the way of clinging into it. The hardness of expectation I had years back, and the, let's say, softer way of expecting my intentions to be fulfilled I have today. I would say I became maybe more soft.
And if you had to put success in one word, what would that word be?
Being in peace.
And if Alexandra Kreis had to put one word on success, what success means in one word for her, what would that be?
Truth.
I think it's success is feeling very good about what you've done.
I would say either obsession or hyperfocus.
If you had to choose one word to describe success for you, what would that one word be?
Commitment.
I think peace.
Simplicity.
I would say purpose, because I feel like, so that wasn't one word because I carried on, but one word, purpose.
Gratitude.
Happiness.
Gratitude.